It happened before 8,000 witnesses on a field in Switzerland. The morning was clear, the sky open, the Alps visible in the distance. The tent erected near the seminary at Econ had been built to hold a crowd that stretched far beyond what anyone had planned for. And an old archbishop, 82 years old, his hands steady despite everything, walked to the altar knowing that when the ceremony ended, he would be cut off from the church he had served for more than 6 decades. He knew it. He had been told. He went forward anyway. That was June 30, 1988. Today, 38 years later, the Society of St. Pius X has announced the names of 4 priests who are scheduled to receive episcopal consecration on July 2026 at that same Econ seminary. The Vatican has warned publicly that this will constitute, in its exact words, a schismatic act. Sources in Rome describe a decree already prepared, modeled, they say, almost word for word on the one issued in 1988. And faithful Catholics around the world are asking a question that no one in Rome has officially answered. How does history not only repeat itself, but repeat itself on the same day? Before we go any further, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. Your presence here matters more than you know. Let us go back to the beginning. Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre was not a fringe figure. He had been a major superior of the Holy Ghost Fathers, a Vatican-appointed apostolic delegate to French-speaking Africa, and a participant at the Second Vatican Council. He founded the Society of St. Pius X in 1970 in Econ, Switzerland, with the explicit purpose of forming traditional priests who would celebrate the ancient Latin Mass. He had watched the liturgical reforms of the 1960s unfold, and he had concluded that something essential was being discarded. For years, Rome watched him in return. For years, there were meetings, negotiations, warnings, and silences. And for years, Lefebvre stood his ground. His argument was not that he hated the church. His argument was that the church had been wounded by the reforms of the council, by what he called the spirit of modernism creeping into the liturgy, by the abandonment of practices that Catholics had held as sacred for centuries. He believed he was preserving something that those in power had chosen to throw away. Whether one agrees with him or not, that was the sincere conviction of a man who had given everything to the faith he received. By 1988, Lefebvre was aging and concerned about succession. The SSPX had thousands of faithful, dozens of seminarians, a global network of chapels and priories, but no bishop capable of ordaining new priests once Lefebvre himself was gone. He began pressing Rome for permission to consecrate bishops to ensure the society's future. Rome stalled. Negotiations stretched over months, then years. They were long and fragile, and ultimately failed. On June 17, 1988, Lefebvre signed a protocol of agreement with Cardinal Ratzinger, who would later become Pope Benedict XVI. Within days, Lefebvre withdrew his signature, saying he had been misled about the timeline and the sincerity of Rome's intentions. On June 29, 1988, Cardinal Ratzinger sent a telegram to Econ. It carried the personal words of Pope John Paul II himself, asking Lefebvre paternally and firmly to travel to Rome to abandon what he was about to do. The telegram went unanswered. The following morning, June 30, 1988, Archbishop Lefebvre celebrated the Mass at Econ alongside Bishop Antonio de Castro Mayer, the retired bishop of Campos, Brazil, who had long shared Lefebvre's concerns about the direction of the post-conciliar church. In the presence of approximately 8,000 faithful who had come from across the world, Lefebvre consecrated 4 priests as bishops of the Catholic Church. Their names were Bernard Fellet, Bernard Tissier de Mallarès, Richard Williamson, and Alfonso de Galarreta. The ceremony followed the traditional rite precisely. There was the formal exchange in Latin, the question of whether those performing the consecration possessed the apostolic mandate. The assistant priest replied, "Habemus, we have it." Lefebvre had declared that the emergency condition of the church justified his act under canon law, citing the principle of necessity that permits actions otherwise forbidden when a grave spiritual danger makes them unavoidable. Rome did not accept that argument. 2 hours after the ceremony ended, the Holy See released its response. Cardinal Bernardin Ganton, prefect of the Congregation for Bishops, signed the decree. It stated that Lefebvre and the 4 newly consecrated bishops had incurred automatic excommunication under canon law. The decree described the consecrations as a schismatic act. It called on priests and the faithful not to give their assent to what had been done. Lefebvre continued his ministry until his health failed. He died on March 25, 1991, still under excommunication, never reconciled with Rome. He was 85 years old. The four men he had consecrated continued their work within the SSPX, leading its seminaries and districts, building the structures he had left behind. But they remained, in the eyes of canon law, excommunicated, their acts valid but illicit, their positions irregular, their relationship to the church officially broken. That state lasted more than 20 years. In January 2009, Pope Benedict XVI lifted the excommunications of the four surviving bishops, Felley, Tissier de Mallarès, Williamson, and de Galarreta, as a personal gesture of pastoral openness. It was not a theological vindication. It did not restore the SSPX to full canonical regularity, but it was a door reopened, a signal that Rome was willing to continue the conversation. The SPX welcomed the lifting of the personal penalties, but did not return to full communion. The theological dispute over the Second Vatican Council remained unresolved. Benedict's generosity bought time. It did not close the wound. What happened next to those four men is important to understand, because it is precisely where the 2026 situation becomes more complex than many realize. Richard Williamson, the English-born bishop consecrated at Écône in 1988, had become one of the most controversial figures in the traditional Catholic world. He was expelled from the SSPX itself in 2012, following a series of incidents, including public statements denying the full extent of the Holocaust, his refusal to submit to the authority of the Society's Superior General, and an unauthorized pastoral visit to Brazil. He continued his priestly ministry independently and gathered a small group of followers. He died on January 29, 2025, at the age of 84, following a cerebral hemorrhage at his home in Margate, England. He was not, at the time of his death, a member of the SSPX. He had been expelled from the very society whose founding moment he had helped to define. Bernard Felley, who served as Superior General of the SPX for many years and was the Society's chief negotiator with Rome, remained active and loyal to the institution. Alfonso de Galarreta, the youngest of the four original bishops, also remained within the Society and in good standing. It is these men, Felley and de Galarreta, who are reported by major Catholic news sources, including the National Catholic Register, to be among those expected to perform the new episcopal consecrations on July 1, 2026. The original act, it seems, is to be continued by its survivors. Now we arrive at the present moment, and here precision becomes essential. What is documented and verified is this. On May 26, 2026, the Society of St. Pius X publicly announced the names of four priests to be consecrated as bishops. They are Fathers Pascalibre of Switzerland, Michael Goldade of the United States, Michel Poinsinet de Sivry of France, and Marc Hanapi of France. These are not the same four individuals as the 1988 consecrations. They are four new priests from four different countries who have formed and prepared for this moment within the SPX seminaries. The channel's title frames this as the same four bishops, but the meaning is thematic, not personal. The pattern repeats, the individuals differ. What is also documented? On May 13, 2026, the Vatican's Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, led by Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez, issued a formal public statement. It declared that the planned consecration of bishops by the SSPX without a papal mandate would constitute a schismatic act, and that those who performed or received such consecrations would incur the penalty of excommunication under current canon law. The language was formal, deliberate, and unmistakable. Rome had said exactly what it would do. What is reported by Roman sources, but not yet officially confirmed as of this recording. Pope Leo XIV is said to have already had a decree prepared, modeled on the 1988 document, that would formally declare the excommunications incurred once the act takes place. The decree, according to those reports, follows what Vatican analysts are calling the 1988 jurisprudence, the same legal and theological framework applied by John Paul II and Cardinal Ganton 38 years ago. Whether this decree exists in final form, whether it will be issued, whether last-minute negotiations might prevent it from ever being signed, none of that has been officially confirmed. We are, at the time of this recording, still on the near side of July 1. What is the mystery that faithful Catholics are raising? that this event is scheduled for July 1, 2026. The 1988 consecrations took place on June 30. The excommunication decree from Cardinal Gantin was dated July 1, 1988. The 2026 consecration is announced for July 1, 2026, 38 years to the day of the original Vatican response. It is that date, July 1, that lies at the center of the question the faithful are asking quietly in forums and comment sections and parish hallways. Is this deliberate? Is it defiance dressed in the clothing of symmetry? Is it the SSPX acknowledging that it walks the same path on the same day with the same intention and that the echo is intentional? Or is it something else? Something that those who pray and watch and wonder have begun to describe in the language of pattern, of providence, of a conflict that history seems unable to resolve, no matter how many decades pass. The Vatican has not commented on the date itself. Father Davide Pagliarani, the Superior General of the SPX, has been consistent in articulating the Society's position. The SPX does not seek schism. It seeks the continuation of authentic Catholic tradition. It consecrates bishops not out of rebellion, but out of what it regards as necessity, the same necessity Lefebvre invoked in 1988. Rome disagrees. Rome has always disagreed. And yet here we are again on the same crossroads, with nearly identical language being exchanged between the same institutions. Pope Leo XIV, the first American pope in the history of the Catholic Church, elected on May 8, 2025, following the death of Pope Francis on April 21, 2025, inherited this conflict from two predecessors. Francis had spent years in dialogue with the SPX, extending canonical accommodations, including permission for SSPX priests to validly witness marriage, and for the faithful to receive sacraments from SSPX priests in cases of necessity. These were extraordinary gestures of proximity, and yet they were not enough to bring the society into full communion. Now, under Leo XIV, a man who trained in canon law, who spent years as a missionary in Peru, who understands both the letter of the law and the weight of pastoral mercy, Rome appears to have reached the point where further patience is read as abdication. What does any of this mean for ordinary Catholics watching from a distance? It means that the church they love is once again facing a rupture. Not a sudden collapse, not a betrayal from outside, but the slow, grinding repetition of a conflict that has refused to resolve itself for nearly 4 decades. The questions the faithful ask are not academic. They ask who is right. They ask how men who believe in the same God, who say the same Latin words at the same altars, who trace their priesthood back to the same apostles, can find themselves on opposite sides of a decree of excommunication. They ask, if this happened in 1988 and the church survived, and the excommunications were lifted in 2009, and the dialogue continued for 17 more years, what does it mean that the same day arrives again in 2026 with 4 more names on a list? There is no prophetic text that specifically named July 1 as a day of division. The mystics who have spoken of a wounded church, of a division among shepherds, of a time when the faithful would not know where to turn, spoke in images and urgency, not in calendars or dates. To assign a specific prophetic significance to this particular date would go further than the evidence allows. But to notice the pattern, to sit with the weight of that repetition, to ask what it means that history has brought us to the same coordinates, is not superstition. It is attentiveness. It is the kind of watchfulness the church has always asked of those who love her. The church has a long memory. Canon law preserves what happened in 1988 precisely because the past precedents become the language of future decisions. When Cardinal Fernandez issued his warning in May 2026, he was not improvising. He was citing law shaped by what happened in that tent in Switzerland on a June morning 38 years ago. When the SPX announced its 4 priests and the July 1 date, whether deliberately or not, it stepped into the shadow of that same event. In every conflict between institutional authority and sincere religious conscience, a moment arrives when both sides believe with equal conviction that they are defending the sacred. Lefebvre believed that in 1988. The men preparing for consecration in 2026 believe that now. Pope Leo XIV faces the same impossible tension his predecessors faced, enforce the law and risk deepening a wound that took 20 years to partially heal, or hold back and risk appearing to have no law at all. Some Catholics watching this story believe that no pope would willingly repeat a rupture of that magnitude. They believe that behind the public declarations, conversations are still happening, that the decree, if it exists, will not need to be used. Others believe the SPX has moved past the point where Rome's patience can hold, that the consecration will proceed regardless, and that what follows will be the most significant canonical crisis since Econ itself. We do not know which outcome will come. We are watching as the faithful have always watched, uncertain of what the institution will do, but certain of what they hold in their own hearts. There is something deeply human in the fact that this dispute has outlasted the man who started it, outlasted several popes, outlasted decades of negotiations, and now arrives at a new generation. The priests preparing for consecration in 2026 were children when Lefebvre walked to that altar in 1988. They have grown up inside the world Lefebvre built, formed by its seminaries, shaped by its arguments, marked by its wounds. They are not imitating him in ignorance. They are continuing what they regard as his work, with the same logic, on the same ground, facing the same Rome. What is remarkable about this story is not that it might end badly. What is remarkable is that it has already ended badly once, in 1988, with a decree, with excommunications, with an old man dying, 3 years later, still separated from Rome, and that after all of that, after 20 years, the church found a way to lift the penalty and continue the conversation. That act of Benedict XVI in 2009 was not a reversal of judgment. It was a gesture of hope, a declaration that the wound was not beyond healing, a quiet reaching across the divide. Whether such a gesture is possible again, whether this July 1 becomes another wound or another turning point, whether the same day that closed a door in 1988 might somehow open one in 2026, that is the question the faithful carry into their prayers this week. What we know for certain is that Archbishop Lefebvre stood in a field in Switzerland on June 30, 1988, and chose what he believed was the survival of tradition over the command of Rome. We know that 4 men knelt before him that day, Feli, Tissier de Malares, Williamson, and de Galareta, and accepted the consequences. We know that Richard Williamson, the last of the 4 to make headlines before his death, died in January 2025, never fully reconciled with the institution from which he was separated by that original act. We know that the 2 survivors of the original 4 still living within the SPX may now stand again at Econ as the same act is performed by 4 new men in the same place on nearly the same day. The tent may be different, the faces will be different, the Pope watching from Rome is different, but the question at the center has not changed in 38 years. What does the Church owe to those who believe its traditions are sacred? And what do those believers owe to the Church? That question has no easy answer. It has not found one in 38 years. It may not find one in July 2026, but it deserves to be heard and held and prayed over not by canon lawyers alone, but by every Catholic who has ever sat in a pew and wondered whether the institution they love is still the keeper of what they believe is true. We will be watching. We will keep reporting. And whatever happens on July 1, this channel will be here to help you understand it with honesty, with care, and with the reverence this story deserves. If this video reached you at the right moment, take a second to share it with someone who needs to hear it. And may the Church, whatever it costs her, find her way back to herself.